Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
Well, welcome to Meet the Author. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're talking to Phil Pisani. He lives in Colonie. He's written a book here, Maggie's Wars. It's a novel about World War II, female correspondents in World War II. So welcome, Phil.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Great.
We're going to talk about your writing, your life, and everything. But before we get to the book and your writing,
Okay.
and I'll tell people before we get going too, Phil's going to be here on Thursday night, June 19th. If you like what you hear today, he's going to probably talk about his book and his career and maybe do a little reading. So before we talk about the book, I always like to ask people, give us the capsule short biography. I know you're from down near Binghamton Way. And
Endicott, New York. Binghamton always eclipsed Endicott, but Endicott is really quite a town. It was born from immigrants, but it started out with Endicott Johnson.
Oh, okay.
Shoe company.
Yeah.
It was huge, and they brought all the immigrants from around the country, and they even came just from word of mouth from their relatives to come there and work. And there was just an eclectic neighborhood filled with just the most colorful people in the whole world, and there were a lot of different types of peoples.
Well, in your book, part of the book, before we get to it though, you do have, the book starts in New York City, and it's one of the main characters is sort of in the mafia, I'll say, but
yes. No, I mean, it wasn't sort of.
In the beginning of the book, you do have all kinds of characters. Is that part of? It was
absolutely. Yes, I grew up on the north side of Endicott, a very rough neighborhood, and it was organized crime run, and it was you'd meet these people daily, and when we became old enough, in bars and things of that nature. But they were in church, and they were fascinating. In fact, I have a screenplay of kids growing up. It's called The Big Barbecue. It's about the Appalachian Convention. The Appalachian Convention, of course, is where...
Is that when all the mobsters met?
That's where all the mobsters met, where they identified the mafia as being organized, and that there was an actual organized crime syndicate in the United States, and the Appalachian Convention actually proved that.
Okay, now you were telling me before we started, even though you were in this rough and tumble world, and you're on your webpage, it's philpisani.com, you mentioned you getting in fights and things, but you were always... Yeah. So it sounds like you're a rough and tumble kind of guy, but you were always a big reader. Tell me a little bit about that.
I was a boxer, and in my earlier years, and I street fighter too. I mean, it was just part of the culture of the neighborhood. But my mother worked in a library, and I grew up around books. She would always bring books in, and when she worked at the time when school was out, so from maybe 6 years old, 7 years old on, after school got out, which was right up the corner, I would go to the library and wait for my father to pick her up, or we would walk back through the park to our house. It was a really neat neighborhood, and I just fell in love with books and readings. I loved the smells of the library. I loved the leather. I loved the oak. Yeah. Card catalog was, I don't know, people probably don't even remember.
I do, don't remember.
I know, but I started. She would allow me. They had two sections. You couldn't go into the adult section.
I'm old. I'm probably only a tiny bit younger than you, but back then, if you wanted to get a book out that was in. I think I remember one time I wanted to read Mutiny on the Bounty, and I said, "Can I get Mutiny on the Bounty?" I said, "Well, no, that's in the
right."
We had to go get permission to get those. So
they had a couple vulgar words like "damn" in there or something. It was,
So you're a lifelong reader.
Yes.
Now, so when did you get started? Because you said you went to school in Italy, you went to SUNY Oswego. Were you always a writer? Did it come late in life, or I know this is your first book.
I would say I began writing towards the end of college. And when I was in Italy, which was a year before my where I graduated with my full degree, so at my junior year, when I was in Italy, I started just experimenting writing. Nothing. I wasn't very good. I was long-winded on sentences and things of that nature.
Okay. Well, you've certainly changed. We'll get to that. 'Cause your style is definitely.
No. So then what happened was when I graduated from school, it was very difficult finding a job. I just for a lark, I went to this community newspaper and I asked them if they needed a reporter, and they said, yeah, you can report on local government and
like the school board,
and that kind of obituaries you start out with. Okay. And then I started doing features for him, and it worked out really well. And I was going pretty good, and I was really enjoying it. Then I went back to Italy. I was going to go into a history program in Perugia. The history program failed to materialize.
Okay.
I came back to the States, and I just chipped and putted writing here and there, trying to do short stories. Not very successful at it.
Now, what was your career though while you were trying to write?
In '78, I became started working for the Department of Labor, and then eventually in job placement, things of that nature. But then I got into labor law enforcement. And I became an investigator, labor law investigator. And then I was meeting such great characters in this field, being a field investigator, that my writing really started to.
But when you say labor investigator, what you would be investigating? What New York State labor law violations?
Labor law violations.
But all kinds of
people who don't get paid.
Oh, okay.
People who are paid under minimum wage.
Okay.
Good example is the backstretch workers up here.
Okay.
I had I was involved in that investigation.
All right, so you must, just by going by the nature of what you're telling me, it sounds like you probably did meet some colorful characters.
Oh my gosh. Oh my, yes, very much so.
Well, you mentioned earlier that before we started, you mentioned Ernest Hemingway as you were a big fan of him.
Yes.
And he was, as everyone knows, he started in newspapers, and you started in newspapers.
Yeah.
So what got you going to finally trying short stories? The book is called Maggie's Wars. It's about a female war correspondent in World War II. And it's also told from 2 points of view, which we'll get into. But when did you start finally deciding I'm going to write a whole novel? And what was the genesis of this? There's not too many novels about female.
I was writing screenplays and short stories. I was getting some pretty good play on them.
From agents?
From agents, and I actually had an agent out in California for a brief period of time. I had 3 screenplays. Dracula, which is the history of Dracula's father.
Okay.
Vlad Tepes's father.
Okay. Yeah.
And also, I started doing some short stories. The short stories, I was starting to publish an e-magazine of short stories. They were like in a couple of Tie Road, Tudor, and a Triptych, which is it's kind of like a Hemingway-esque type of a short story. And I have a friend who was just, he was imprisoned in Nevada for heroin use and heroin dealing. He went to school with me, good neighborhood friend, and very intelligent guy.
You do know some colorful characters.
Yeah. And he kept writing me saying, I want to write this book about what's happened to me and what's happened to me. So we finally sat down, and he finally came back. He was traveling all over the world. He got into the Department of Defense as a professor.
Oh, okay.
He was one of the first inmates to start a college program.
Oh, okay.
And he did it in university.
I think, is this the book? I saw the book on Amazon.
From Heroin to Heresy.
Okay, and you helped him out. You were like the co-writer.
Co-author of the book, From Heroin to Heresy. And we got the publisher out of Binghamton University, William Neal Publishing.
Okay.
And we did pretty good with the book.
It's his life story, though.
His life story.
Okay.
So about a couple years after that, my brother, who was going through Paul Smith's College up in the Adirondacks, called me and he says, "Listen, I have a professor that wants to meet you. He wants to talk to you about writing."
Because he read the heroine?
He knew I had that, and he also knew I was a history
Okay.
history buff, a history major, and a history military history buff. So he asked to see me. So I went up to his cabin up in the mountains. He's a really great guy. And we walk in, he poured us each a glass of cognac. And he goes, and I'm looking, we're in the living room, and I'm looking around, and he's got all these medals and citations from various wars. And he was saying, "I hear you know about military history." And I says, "Well, I know a little bit. I mean, I was a Civil War buff and the Pacific Theater in World War II because my father fought in World War II, and he used to tell me these stories of the Philippines and the Luzon invasion, things of that nature." And so I said, "Yeah, I really enjoy reading military history and talking about military history." And he says, "Well, I got some stories for you to talk about, but what I tell you, you can't use my name if you're going to want to write a book about it." And I said, "Well, you want me to write fiction or nonfiction?" He says, "Well, I'm not sure because I just want to be left. I just don't want anybody to know that I'm the one who gave you this information." And he says, "All these medals up here, there's one that I don't have hanging up here. I don't have a plaque hanging up here, and you'll know why when you see it." And he went out and he come back, and he gave me this little plaque with meritorious award and this little inscription saying meritorious service for the liberation of Dachau.
Okay.
And he says, "See, now you understand?" I said, "Well, not really. In fact, I knew Dachau was
one of the
concentration camp, but I didn't really know much. Like I said, I wasn't a World War II European theater aficionado at that time." And he said, "I don't have that up there because people don't know what actually happened there." And I says, "Well," he says, "How can I trust you telling you what happened?" And I said, I guess you have to take my word for it, and I won't write. If you want me to write something, if I find it interesting enough and I want to take it on, I'll do it. And if not, we'll part our ways." I said, "Well, you want me to ghostwrite a book for you? You want me?" He goes, "No, you do whatever you want. You can write fiction, nonfiction, however you want to do it, but you can't." I said, "Well, you're not going to be able to tell me truths and me write nonfiction if you don't want to be." No. I mean, you have to have references and things like that for nonfiction. He says, "Well, if you can do fiction, if you like the story, let me know." Well, I says, "Well, tell me the story." And he was drafted, and he became a special units.
Like the character in
the book.
Well, I'll tell people, one of the characters in here his name is Johnny
Pirro.
And well, we'll get to that, but I think it's going where you're going to be telling me.
And he said, when we first started, they put us in the special unit, and then they taught us basically how to kill people and behind the lines. And they would parachute behind the lines with no patches. And with no patches means that if you're caught, you're caught as a spy and you're shot immediately.
Okay.
And they would always be in front of any type of. They were, if D-Day was June 6th, they would label it D-6.
Oh, okay.
So they would be dropped behind the lines 6 days before the actual invasions or the actual attack.
Did he say, or maybe you're getting to this, did he say why they had to be clandestine? Why they couldn't? Why no patches? Why was it secret? I mean, it was a war. Did he say why they had to be secret?
they're behind the lines, and if you are behind the lines and you're caught caught as a spy. And and some of the operations were questionable, in the sense of morality, I guess.
Well, in your book, Maggie's War, his Johnny and his little his little squad of guys.
Yeah.
If they were sort of in the mafia, the mob.
Well, Johnny was. The other ones weren't.
He doesn't. You don't say. I didn't get to the part. The other ones, but did the Army? Did you do some research? Did they?
Army?
Did they recruit from the mob and people like that to go to these special?
People, during the towards the end of the war, Luciano cleaned up the docks.
Yeah,
the government actually went to Luciano and said, "Listen, we're getting a lot of Germans infiltrating on our docks. We're afraid of sabotage. We want you to clean them up."
That's in your book.
That's in the book, and fictionally.
I mean, it's in a fictional story.
Right, and
but that actually
this is fiction. Yeah, I mean that actually happened. But the fiction part of them coming to and Johnny.
Well, it's
I made the character that.
But it's the old adage, truth comes through fiction.
There's verisimilitude in everything, but in this sense, the person that was asking me to write about what happened at Dachau wasn't.
Okay, so
that's my own.
So after the guy at Paul Smith's told you his story,
I wove a story around. I wrote a story around the events that he did, and also I'll tell you how I got to Maggie.
Okay, yes, and I guess we should get to that because the title of the book is Maggie's War. So we mentioned this character Johnny a little bit, or did you want to say one other thing before we?
Well, I will tell you how I found out about Maggie.
Okay, so tell us about Maggie, the character, and
so there's one operation. They had to go to Dachau. They had to get an OSS officer out of he was a prisoner there. So that was actually their mission, was to get that and try to find this officer there. And when they got there, they saw the death train and all this. I don't want to tell you exactly what happened, but an atrocity happened that really nobody knew about. And it was by our own men and by him as well. And he was crying when he told me. And I said, "Oh, that's something." It's a war, though. People, crazy things happen in war, and. And I mean, and in those days there was a lot of censorship. I mean, you couldn't write like I actually couldn't do anything until really, I think it was Kelly and the My Lai. Atrocities actually when things really started. People can really start writing about what happens in war.
Yeah, I think in the World War II, the famous Ernie Pyle and those guys were and I think even Life magazine, only certain. I think until very late in World War II, they don't think they ever showed a body of a picture of a dead body. I don't think until near the end. I think there was some famous pictures of D-Day, but the home front was always being positive. Of course, war is
that's what it was. It was a positive slant on war, which is kind of it's right. I mean that's what. So as I started when he told me this and we went out to dinner and he was just like kind of nervous about the whole thing. And the next morning, I told him I'll let him know. He says, "Come on up and let me know what you think." I said, and I got up there and I says, "Well, I'm going to research it before. I'm just not going to start weaving a story. Let me research it." And he says, "Well, let me tell you something. There was this woman there, and she was mean, and she jumped out of this Jeep, and she wanted to know what the heck happened." And actually, there was a whole bunch of German soldiers that they lined up and they killed, and she wanted to get to the bottom of it, and her name was Marguerite Higgins. And if you don't believe what I said, you trail her, because she wrote everything. So
was she an actual war reporter?
Marguerite Higgins was the first female war correspondent to win a Pulitzer Prize for war correspondent.
Is
Korean War.
Is Maggie sort of based on?
Based on her, as well as some of these other ones that come in and out. Janet Flannery, she worked for Chicago Tribune. Was the one who coined the word. They wouldn't let women correspondents go to the front. They would always be behind the front in the cities, talking about the women, Rosie the Riveter, and
Well,
those types.
you do mention some of these correspondents in passing, so they make
Yeah.
they make little cameo appearances
Right.
in your book.
Yeah, Helen Kirkpatrick coined the phrase, I can't change my sex, but you could change your policy about us going to the front.
So how did you decide to? Now the book is told from two points of view.
Right.
Maggie and Johnny. You sort of go back and forth. Why did you decide? And they're both told in the first person. So writing from the female point of view, was that new for you? How did you decide?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, it was very new.
So why did you decide to split it up, though? Do you any particular reason, or? It does make for, it's very interesting because when you read the book, you sort of get the same events and situation from different points of view, and because Johnny and Maggie sort of have a love relationship. And
I wanted the male point of view of war and what he saw, and I wanted the female point of view of what he saw. And plus, this female character had tremendous ambition, and they were really two different people. The person who gave me the story and the events that he did, I follow a lot of the events that he did, I thought is good enough for a story itself, as well as her story is good enough for a story itself. So I said, if I marry these two together, but still keep the points of view from each character, it'd be an interesting read.
Oh yeah, definitely, it definitely.
I think Cold Mountain did that.
Okay, I did not read the Fraser
Civil
book.
War
Okay.
one. I'm pretty certain they did that too.
Well, let me talk a little bit. Yes, I'm only halfway, but I'll tell people it's really good. I like how you go back and forth to two characters. You have this style. I mentioned an author to you, but you hadn't read. But your book reminds me very much of like the early Ross MacDonald, one of my favorite writers, and it's also like this sort of Raymond Chandler-esque, noirish, short sentences. Before you're talking about you were long-winded, he's got these short sentences, a great use of similes, just like Ross MacDonald, this Black Mask, in Black Mask magazine, you ever know that? It's sort of like that 1940-ish style. But how did you come up with this? I don't say how did you come up with it. Has that always been your style? Have you been refining it? You said when you first started you were more long-winded. These are a lot short sentences, more, I guess you took some lessons from Hemingway.
I think that any writer kind of has osmosis with what they read, and but when you sit down to start creating the sentences, it's really, I think it's the guts that puts the words on the paper. I don't consciously try to write a short sentence. Okay. I try to mend the sentence after I write it. If I don't like it, on a rewrite, there's hundreds of rewrites. But once you get moving, you just let the flow take over. That's how I do it.
Okay. Well, the story is it's sort of very fast-paced, action-packed. So this starts out, though, it's not a war thing in the beginning. So is there a reason why, instead of just making it, the war story, the two of them, they start out in New York and then they both end up over and they sort of meet up again? They have this, it's sort of a love story, too.
It's a love story. Well, it is a love story. It's an almost unrequited love, you'll see.
But, some of the obstacles women had back then, not just you were talking before about the war. Maggie tries to get a job at the New York, was it the Tribune?
Herald Tribune.
And back then, women, I don't know how many, were there women reporters just in general, not forget war?
Not very many. There were these, Marguerite Higgins, Janet Flannery, Gellhorn, Dickie Chappelle was a photographer in Iwo Jima. That was the one that they were yelling and screaming, what the hell is that woman doing here? Taking pictures. These women were fabulous. They were the pioneers, and I'm surprised that there's not more about them. I think there was a novel or fiction, a nonfiction book that came out several years ago about most of them. But these people were these women were very courageous, ambitious, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. They fought and struggled to get to these war zones.
So what was it like? You write when you're writing Maggie's part in the first person, what was that like trying to be writing from the female point of view?
It was it's difficult, but one of the reasons why I made it a love story is I think emotions, love, courage, ambition. Those are
She has all those.
They're universal.
Yeah.
They're universal between male and female.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're writing from a man would feel the same type of ambition that a female would. So if you're using those emotions for, they're the same.
Mm-hmm.
There's parts of, from the female point of view that I struggled with, that I had help from females.
Okay.
Some things they would say, female wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
And, so.
Well, the
It
book
wasn't easy.
Well, the book, like I say, it's sort of fast paced. It's sort of gritty. You mentioned that your book is selling. You are selling some, but you've gone to some book clubs or book
Clubs just from word of mouth are picking up and buying 6.
So
7.
when the author himself appears at one of these book clubs, I know most book clubs. I don't know the ones you've been to. Most of the ones that we get books for in the library that I've heard of or people are in are almost all exclusively always women. So
I know.
the ones have you been to? Were they mainly women?
I haven't been yet. They're coming up this month.
Oh, okay.
They're all women.
All right. I thought you said you had been to a couple. Okay.
Yeah, my wife's getting a little nervous.
Okay. But no, the book is, and then I guess I should say it starts out, there's a World War II. They end up going to, I think, Dachau, and then I didn't get to the part yet, but do both characters end up covering the Nuremberg trials? Is that it?
She covers the Nuremberg trials. Johnny at that time at that point the Defense Department where these espionage type soldiers were that Department of Defense slowly evolved into the Office of Strategic Services, and then eventually they becomes the CIA.
Okay. Now I'm going to just read a couple sentences because I want people to get your style here. I mentioned already that you remind me so much of Ross McDonald, who's one of my all-time favorites. But this is from your blog. You wrote a little bit about yourself, and I think this is really your book is written in the same sort of style, and it's very. I'll just read so people get a flavor. You write, "I learned to fight at a very young age, both in the ring and on the streets. Fights became badges of honor. I was also a voracious reader. My mother worked in the village's library, and after school or fights or sandlot football games, I would curl away into the adult reading section, enjoying the polished blonde oak bookshelves, tables and chairs, choose a book from the stacks and delve into its smells and contents. Reading soothed me." So I love your use of, in your book, you write in the same style, but you just aren't, you're writing from two different points of view, a male and a female, but it isn't just their thoughts and emotions. You mention what they're seeing, what they're experiencing, how they do things. It's very the tables and chairs and the smell, and your book has got all that in there. So,
Thank you.
Now on your website, I want to mention quickly, on your website you have you write about horse racing a little bit. Have you thought about writing maybe a la Dick Francis type book?
I have a book in the hopper. I'm writing it right now. It's called The Backstretch, but that's which obviously involves the horse racing industry with all the types, with all the characters, owners, trainers.
Okay.
But focusing more on the backstretch workers, more like a Cannery Row type.
Oh, okay. Sure. So you're a John Steinbeck fan too.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And then you mentioned on your website, and I think on the back of your book here, this is your first book. You got 3 or 4 sort of besides that one. What else are you working on?
I'm working on that. That's called The Backstretch, and I'm also working on a novel called The Sins of Liberty, and that's about a Mexican migrant worker that dying to get to America. Once he gets here, finds out that it's not what it's all cracked up to be.
Okay, that sounds sort of Steinbeckish a little bit. What was the tortilla flat? Was that his one?
Tortilla flat, right? Yes, yeah.
Well, so I'll just tell people, Phil's going to be here Thursday night, June 19th, 7 o'clock. If you want to hear some stories, and go to his webpage. It'll be here on the screen. It's philpisani.com. There's a link on there to his horse racing writing, and a great style. I love your style of writing. I got to finish the book. I'm at the part where they're at Dachau. So, anything else you want to add to before we end here?
From there, no. I'm looking forward to continuing my writing career. I'm excited about this. This is my baby.
Are you retired from the?
I'm retired from the
All right,
from the state.
Do you like devoting more time now to writing?
I love it. I love to write. I really do. I love to sit down and write several hours a day in the morning.
Oh, good. Well, you have one here, 3 more coming, hopefully. And when you get the other ones, you'll come back and see us, and we'll talk about it.
I'm doing a sequel.
Oh, to this?
Yeah, there's a sequel to that.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
Is it also told from their points of view, or?
Same style.
Okay. And
there's a sequel.
Will it go into the Korean War, or you don't want to give it?
It'll be all up to the Vietnam.
Okay. So that's Maggie's Wars by Colonie resident Phil Pisani, and we will see you next time on Meet the Author.